You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to A Life in Ruins podcast, episode 136. We investigate the careers of those living a life in ruins. I'm your host, Carlton Gover, and I am actually joined by my co-hosts, Connor Johnin and David Howe. Tonight, we have a special episode featuring a fan favorite, Dr. Shane Miller from Mississippi State. And tonight, we're talking about Episode 6 of Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse, America's Lost Civilization. We just finished watching it. We didn't watch the other 5 episodes. This is the only episode we've watched. And my head hurts.
I believe him. He convinced me.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess starting with you, Shane. What's your general reaction to watching that episode?
That was fucking weird. That was that was an acid trip I didn't ask for.
We just finished it like 10 minutes ago.
Yeah. I still haven't had time to really process it. That was weird. That was really weird. I just gave my last final of the semester earlier today, and I'm like reconsidering everything. So I don't know. He's right. Clearly. Apparently, I need to just stop telling my students to read and tell them to start listening to Joe Rogan.
There was a lot of theories presented in what amounted to a 30-minute episode. Connor, how you doing over there, buddy?
I feel like I've been running through hoops and like shot across the world. It was just this wild ride of like you can't even process it when you're getting thrown through it because the arguments are like so short, sweet, and there's no questions asked in between anything. It's like you're just on this wild ride, this roller coaster that he has in his brain that generally connects to something that happens. It hurts. I'm physically hurt. My face physically hurts.
Yeah, so the whole point of the show is to back Graham's claim of some sort of ancient apocalyptic event. So each of these 7 episodes investigate different regions, and he finds, quote, evidence to support some sort of global apocalypse that happened in the past. So we just watched an episode that specifically focused on mound building cultures. And I use the word cultures loosely because he really focuses on two sites and cherry picks, which we'll get on to in the next 2 segments. But
I don't think he cherry picks, dude. He like maraschino cherry picks. It's the best ones.
Right. And he does, and then sprinkles his own bullshit in there. But like Hancock, we've talked about him.
Grahamcock is his new name.
Grahamcock. Yeah,
we're gonna get trouble for that one.
We know we're protected.
Okay.
Yeah, we're. If anyone wants to come through us, they could have the $400 in our bank account, but they still have to get through the APN first.
I'm putting my video up.
Yeah. Yeah. Pony up, Chris and Rachel. And we decided to do episode 6, particularly 1, because we had Shane on the show. We're all more familiar with American archaeology than the other topics like Gobekli Tepe and other places. And then also, if those of you who listen to the Archaeology Podcast Network know that a couple other shows have touched upon the first 2 episodes, and so we kind of wanted to skip ahead and carve out something that's ours and that we can be authorities on as much as we can be believed to be authorities. With that being said, though, we've talked about Graham a number of times on the show, and me, Connor, and David have talked about Graham and Shane and Jesse Toon from Fort Lewis College, who's been on the show a couple times as well, about Graham. And he is not a trained archaeologist. He is a writer by trade, journalist. And interestingly enough, his son is a content producer at Netflix, which may explain how Graham was able to land this deal, although it has been rather phenomenal to see that the Society for American Archaeology has put out probably one of its quickest statements in the society's history, condemning Netflix. All the other, horrible things that have happened in the SCA, they take a little bit, but, God, we got to get Graham down. And you can find that statement on the Society for American Archaeology website.
That only helps him win. Like, I don't like that. And I'm firm on that opinion. I agree that, like, he's spewing, like, nonsensical stuff, but, like, his whole thing is that archaeologists are this secret Illuminati society that hide the truth and are stuck in their ways. And then when the entire society is like, we condemn you, it, like, only helps his argument. Like, get over it.
What's the strategy? Just ignore them? Just, like, not oxygen into
Don't give him air. Ignore him, or, like, meet him on his level and, like, talk to him. But, like, none of them want to talk to him, apparently. He said that on the show. He was like, I've reached out to people. No one wants to argue with me. And it's like, all right.
Well, he has a history of, when he does talk with archaeologists, he employs the same sort of debating tactics as Ben Shapiro or other known pundits that engage in really not, what's the word I'm looking for? They're not well-meaning when they're there to sit with people. It's not an actual dialogue or conversation. Like, Graham is out to push a narrative. He has oratory strategies in order to disable his opponents. And as we've talked about at the show ad nauseum, the vast majority of archaeologists and anthropologists do not have the communication skills and the public speaking skills or the debate skills to engage with individuals like Graham Hancock at a platform
I can see
that's beneficial to both parties. Yeah, like we saw that with, like, Bill Nye the Science Guy when he went up against
creation guy.
What is his name? The Australian. Like, I can see his. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Ken Ham. Ken Ham. Yeah. We have Graham Hancock and Ken Ham. I thought Bill postured himself well, but, like, it kind of, to your point, David, like, what happened after that special came out? Ken Ham got all the money he needed immediately following that special to build his Ark and his interpretive museum, right? Like, that was the result of that national stage. So I think because of his history of engaging with archaeologists in that manner, now we have a situation where archaeologists don't want to engage with him, and it will have to probably come down to maybe a few individuals who, like, legit get trained up to debate with Graham. But in any issue with that is, and that you see on this show, is Graham takes us to a rather a large variety of places across the globe. He dips into many different cultural groups and time periods. And as our listeners know on the show, like, when we interview people, they're specialized in a particular region, a particular time period, or a particular material culture. We don't, like, sit down with encyclopedias of archaeology and know everything, right? Like, we're very specialized in what we know, and we're very open about, like, we brought Shane on because he lives in the South. He goes to SEAC. He knows mound cultures. I do earth lodges and plains towns. Like, I'm not an authority or know that record yet. Now I just got handed the fucking giant 2-volume book on angel mounds to start dipping my toes into Mississippian world. I'll see you at SEAC next year. Ooh. Shane, I know.
That's a lot.
I'm scared, man.
I'm so scared. SEAC will be fun. Angel Mounds is a monster. That's a heavy hitter. That's a famous one.
Yeah,
I've never heard of it.
It's in my museum. Like, we own that collection. It's terrifying.
Don't screw it up.
Does it align with True North?
Actually, well, I want to get into that later, because our new museum, we have a whole virtual reality dome that actually recreates angel mounds, and you can go through different day cycles and time periods and years that you can actually see alignments and stuff like that.
We should probably talk about that whenever we get to the serpent mound stuff, like Tim Pocketat stuff with archaeology. Like, there's stuff here that Hancock goes through that is not like new stuff. It's like he didn't come up with this. Archaeologists have been talking about some of this stuff for decades. That's the other frustrating thing. It's like, it's literally watching that was like Like when you're a professor and you got your kids and, you know, you got your students, you got your grad students, you give them assigned readings, they all can't come in. You know which ones are prepared. They're ready for a deep conversation. And then you got the person who showed up, is clearly read the abstract maybe to the articles, and then like is like scanning the Wikipedia page and then picks up on the conversation and tries to jump in. And they just sound, it's very skin deep, like treatment of the topic. But then they just run off in some crazy direction, like derailing the whole class. This is what Graham Hancock feels like, is like the guy who shows up without reading and attempts to be provocative to impress a class ends up looking like an idiot to everybody else who's read. But if you haven't read, well, then it's like, oh, sure, whatever. But like if you've read the material and you know the literature, and it's just like, no.
Right.
But like we were talking about earlier, it's like if you try to argue with somebody like that, they'll say something crazy. It takes you 3 minutes to explain the background information to contextualize why the idea is crazy. Before you even get into that 3 minutes, they say something else crazy and something else crazy. And it's like trying to keep up with crazy. And it's like,
what does that remind you of?
Yeah, I
Barney
know.
Taylor.
Yeah, like
I meant Trump, but
like political discourse now. It's like trying to argue with somebody on Fox. It's like trying to argue with like a family member at Thanksgiving, and it's just like, this is just a losing battle.
Yeah, but yes, it is like arguing with a family member at Thanksgiving, I would say. Connor?
And I think the space that Graham is talking about in this episode, specifically the archaeoastronomy, is something that is talked about in archaeology, but maybe it's not something that everyone is really interested or fully buys, because, and this is just my personal opinion, I think that, I mean, it is interesting to look at celestial locations and where things point, etc. But I'm really just not truly interested in that as I am like the material record of where people lived and other things. So I think this spot that he's attacking in archaeology has a history of being associated with pseudoscience and less accepted within the discipline. But that doesn't mean there isn't good scholarship done within this. And Shane, like we'll talk about in the poverty point section, there's like a good paper that kind of delves into these ideas and really focuses on and does a good work of scholarship. But I think Graham really attacks that area because it's not accepted as much. I don't know. That's kind of my...
It's also sexy looking too. Like everyone... Like I grew up watching History Channel and stuff, and like the Maya and the Aztec calendars and stuff, and like how it aligns with celestial stuff and like doomsday calendar and all that stuff. Like it's cool sounding, and like, oh, that makes sense, and like it's kind of ethereal, and like what he does is, like you said, he attacks that and like or uses that as his like weapon, and like people tuning in on Netflix that are like moderately into history, like whoa. And then he spends the whole time saying archaeologists don't do this. Like he literally said in that episode, archaeologists just rule out archaeoastronomy because they don't understand it. And it's like, yeah, it's not our job. But like, I'm totally happy to include an astronomer into here if we had to.
I think it's funny, his strategy at the beginning of where he was like, I feel like I'm less deconstructing his archaeology in this and more interested in how he constructed his arguments. It's like the rhetoric is more interesting than the actual archaeology stuff that he's talking about. And I think it's fascinating that he starts off with peopling of the Americas stuff. And he starts out with that as like the undermining thing of like, people thought it was this way for so long and it was dogmatic. And now he brings out White Sands and Cerruti, which I feel like we should have had a bingo card ready to go. And it's like, those would have both been on it for a bingo.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've talked about those sites with you guys. Like one's very controversial. The other one's controversial to the point of being absurd. And he uses that as like this, like crack in the door to like sow doubt into the establishment. And it's like, I feel like I'm like, oh, this is my corner. This is me and my colleagues not having our stuff together and not making good faith arguments and talking past each other. And leaves the crack in the door open for some guy to come busting through with like using this as like a gateway to crazy.
Yeah. But the hard part is that if we don't have engaged in these dialogues, I don't think we're doing the scientific method and process, and we shouldn't, like the inverse would that be like, we don't debate anything or don't allow these things to happen.
I'm not saying not debate the peopling in the Americas. I'm saying maybe the way in which the debate has played out has made it seem, I don't know. I'm struggling for my words here.
Is it like too dogmatic? Like that's...
I think maybe just the contentiousness of it and the way it was always set out as like, you have these Clovis police, blah, 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 blah. And then now look, the Clovis police are wrong. And so this is an example of how archaeologists can be wrong. And so I'm going to tell you about other places where archaeologists are probably wrong. Like they were wrong about the people of the Americas, leaving out the historical fact that somebody like Vance Haynes was like, you know, he's like, I'm open to being wrong. He actually set up the scientific 3 criteria, that's got to be archaeological. It's got to be a good context, got to be in a date. And if it's older than Clovis and it matches all 3 of those, well, then the Clovis, he literally set up the guidelines by which you would undermine the Clovis. And, you know, then, you know, the story behind the story of like, when Friedkin came out, Vance Haynes, Mr. Clovis Police himself, sent a nice letter to Mike Waters saying, this looks like a really great site. I'm really impressed with what you did, and I really want to see more. So it's like, how dogmatic is if like the fucking sheriff of the Clovis Police is like sending letters to Mike Waters congratulating him on his pre-Clovis site. Like this is, if you don't know and you're not in these circles, it's easy to believe that this narrative is as simplistic as Graham Hancock lays it out to be, when it's clearly not at all.
I think that is a great place to end the first segment, and we will come back in diving more into the chaos that was this episode.
And welcome back to episode 136 of Life from Roots podcast. And in the interim, we've been joined by Dr. Jesse Toon from Fort Lewis College. He's shown up, so the band is back together. And Jesse is just going to be reacting to the news, like just the ridiculous things that Grahamcock says, because Jesse hasn't watched the episode. So for our listeners, because we have failed to do this, like a brief outline of this episode. It's 30 minutes long. He starts off with like how the Americas got populated. He talks about just the Bering Land Bridge theory, which is, we've talked about this before, but then he mentions the footprints in New Mexico and Cerruti as being evidence of earlier occupations. And it just so happens the same 2 guests that we've had on to talk about the White Sands footprints and settlers of Cerruti are here. So if you want context on our feelings towards those 2 sites, go back and check those out so you know our opinions. And then he goes into, he talks about colonial land grabs. Like he sets up with this place used to have a lot of indigenous people, like they had culture, they were here, they did all these amazing things, and then they were all wiped out. And so he props them up, claims of all this indigenous culture, but then like kind of then uses it to say like archaeologists aren't listening to indigenous people, but then he doesn't listen to indigenous people. So in both the 2 sites, so then moving on from how
that's a good point.
A very brief intro of one hypothesis of colonization of the Americas. He goes to Poverty Point in Louisiana, does 10 minutes there, and then he talks about serpent mounds in Ohio and does about 15 minutes there. And in both of those instances, he mentions that indigenous people created these and they had culture and they were smarter than archaeologists give them credit for, which is an antiquated way that archaeologists have talked about them, really antiquarians, which we've talked about on the show. But then he doesn't talk about indigenous people. He doesn't talk about their oral traditions or what they have to say. And more often than not, he talks about the Iroquois and specifically to serpent mounds, which aren't ancestral to the Ohio River Valley in one of their creation stories. And he tries to like force those things together to support his mound, because the Iroquois have this great horned serpent legend. Their serpent mounds is a snake. Grahamcock is wearing snake garters in a fucking mowed lawn. There was a lot going on, just a lot. So just a brief background on what this 30 minutes of continual stream of consciousness by Graham of building an argument based on very thin threads of, I wouldn't even consider evidence. It's one of those, well, if this is true, then this could be true. And if that's true, then this could be true. It's like one of those really ridiculous building block arguments. And as we've talked about on this show before, like, there's a couple strategies of pseudoscience that pseudoscientists use to build their arguments. There's 3: appeals to authority, deflection of topics, and inciting skepticism of the scientific process. In this whole show, the episode that we watched, he doesn't appeal to authority. He says he's the authority. He doesn't deflect topics because no one's really challenging him. Or if they do, they don't show it, as David will mention. The entire show is him just inciting skepticism of archaeologists. Throughout the entire thing, he says mainstream archaeologists believe this, and he uses like very absolute terminology in describing how archaeologists hate him. They don't like his theories, or like they don't believe in archaeoastronomy. Like he uses this as like all archaeologists don't do this. There's no room for like the debates within archaeology that are going on, the growth of archaeological debates. He's very much a Sith in dealing with absolutes here.
I was going to bring that up. Thank you for saying it.
Absolutely. So, Connor, what goes on down at Poverty Point in Louisiana?
So he does like you said, 15 minutes or so split between these two areas. Poverty Point specifically, he talks about how it's just a huge structure and you can see far, and does this weird throws in like defensive structure as like a potential thing for it, and then just like discounts and runs away. He says that like this, he does contextualize Poverty Point as being unique and existing within the time periods that we as archaeologists attribute to it. But he also is skeptical and thinks that there's continuous developing and kind of improving the site, and that possibly the site's been in constant use for 10,000 years, etc. He then brings in the site manager,
Capitol Rioter. We weren't sure what he was.
Yeah.
It's funny. He's actually the person who runs the site is Diana Greenlee. And it's interesting that she's not the person that's walking around talking to Graham Hancock. It's somebody else.
It looks like someone from maintenance.
Yeah. I don't know. The guy could be like I have no idea what this guy's background is.
He's just a landscaper.
I just know he's not Diana Greenlee. And so I think that's kind of interesting.
Well, there's like constant coming back to him and Graham talking, or the guy talking, and kind of that's his appeal to authority, and gets these little snippets of kind of support Graham's theory. This guy says something, and he keeps doing that through this whole first part. So he continues on. He's like, it's old, blah, blah, blah. Archaeology is mostly right. And then he starts getting into these like kind of cosmological connections and the orientation of mounds, and kind of goes on this wild tangent about all the locations that are pointed out by the different orientations of the mounds, north, south, east, west, solstices, all kinds of stuff that exist in time and space. But
yeah, he's like, if you stand on this mound, you can see the solstice. It's like, yeah, it's flat, and it's a pyramid with a platform. Like all of these places, you could see an astronomical event or alignment if they're the center of your isthmus. Like it was just bonkers.
Yeah,
I think I don't know if Bob talked about it on the episode we had him on, but I asked him, because he had said he went to a lecture where Carl Sagan was there when he was at Cornell. And Carl Sagan, it was a lecture about some like stone circle or medicine wheel. And Carl Sagan essentially is like calculated something in the audience and was like, well, technically, like if you look in any direction in this wheel, since it's a circle, you'll find something it aligns with. So like, what's your point? And like, I was thinking that the entire time while he was talking about that, because like that corridor does make sense. Like when you're standing on Poverty Point and you can see the sun, but like, I don't know, man. Like,
I really don't have a problem with it pointing to solstices and alignments. I mean, I sent that article to you guys where Ken Sassaman had like laid out all these, argued that there's like site architecture for all those lower Mississippi River Valley archaic mounds, and he's got a whole entire argument about how they're like calling upon, like by integrating these things in space, they're calling upon kind of history in their construction, and people do that.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that he made as part of this, and he eventually gets to these wood henge structures and talks about them, and also same sort of alignment stuff. But then his ultimate kind of point from that is that mainstream archaeologists don't acknowledge or say that these things are connected or that there's archaeoastronomy occurring in any sort of mainstream archaeology. And then the final point is that
we refuse to accept it or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Shane immediately sends us an article like linking to someone in a published report, like he just mentioned, of like archaeoastronomy. And it's like, and we've seen that in Chaco, other Mississippian sites and elsewhere. Like archaeoastronomy is a talked about subdiscipline that it's going through growing pains at the moment, because some people use it very haphazardly, but in other places it's like, okay, cool.
Yeah,
makes sense.
I don't know the last time I was in a room with more than 2 Southwestern archaeologists and archaeoastronomy did not come up. Like that is something that a lot of archaeologists very much talk about and try in various ways to build into their thoughts and interpretations. And like you just said, there's some growing pains with that. But yeah, I mean, that gets at this bigger question of mainstream or quote established archaeology, WTF. Like, I wish there was such a thing. We would have less confrontational conferences and discussions amongst archaeologists sometimes, I think, if there was this giant cabal where we all agreed and were, you know, thinking the same thing.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
It'd be really cool to be part of the Illuminati.
It would be.
You know, it'd be kind of like really cool. You know, I where do I send in my application?
I'd get laid a lot more and do cocaine. It would be awesome.
Yeah, like we've said this, but we've mentioned this every time we're on. This comes up. It's like, I wish there was some worldwide organization controlling archaeologists, because at least they'd pay us to be quiet. Like, sign me up. I have debt to take care of. Like, I'd like to be part of a global conspiracy. That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
I don't think archaeologists. Yeah, I don't think we would collectively be as in debt as we are if this thing existed, right? Look at our bank accounts.
We're like the worst Illuminati.
One thing, and so poverty point is 3,700 to 3,100 BP, so before present. So just subtract 2,000, that gets you 1,700 to 1,100 BCE. It's in Louisiana. One thing that he talks about is that he mentions like there's no documents about how they wrote it. It's like, yeah, no shit, there weren't documents, dude. It's oral histories, which he also doesn't mention, but there are some. Like, I did like a quick Google search and came up with like 4 articles of other peer-reviewed papers talking about oral traditions of southeastern tribes relating to poverty point, specifically to owls for some reason. I guess there's a lot of owl jasper production at Poverty Point.
Yeah, they got these little owl like bead effigy things that are really freaking cool.
Owls are devil birds, and therefore they're devil people. No wonder that devil worship was extinguished. So,
okay,
yeah, fair enough. One thing I would like to add: Connor mentioned that he was speaking with the man I call the Capitol Rioter, which I feel bad for saying. He's probably a lovely gentleman. Was, if you watch it, and especially if you watch any Netflix documentary, Discovery Channel documentary, or history documentary, watch the interview between him and this person, and you can see how heavily edited it is for him to just say, "We don't know yet," or like, "We don't know." There was probably 10 minutes of talk on the camera there that the guy explained a very valid point. Yeah, he did look flustered.
Visibly flustered. Like, for the rest of that interview, he's like calm, chill, like, this is Poverty Point. And then it gets to that last segment. He's like, well, we just don't know. Like, he's clearly defensive. He's worked up. Grahamcock had been putting him through the ringer. And that's the segment that they grabbed from him, is like what they wanted.
Can this be a verb from now on, Grahamcocking?
Yeah, Grahamcocking him. I kind of feel like if we see this cat at SEAC, we probably need to get him a beer, because like he may have just been the guy that he's like everybody's like, who's going to talk to Graham Hancock? And everybody's just like stared at him, and he's like, son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And it had to be the guy.
Well,
was he forestry? Did it say forestry on his shirt?
It said staff. It said staff manager.
Yeah, he's probably works for Louisiana State Parks.
Well, okay. And we'll see. I think it's an interesting counterpoint to what we'll see in the Serpent Mounds part, where they refuse to have the conversation.
Yeah. He stands out front the gates and like reads off an email where the staff at Serpent Mounds are like, essentially like, if Graham Hancock's associated with this, we don't want to talk to him, because what he wants to talk about is not at all in alignment with our interpretation of the site, what archaeologists interpret the site, what indigenous communities interpret the site. And he's like, see, they're trying to censor me. And it's like, well, did you just not see what you did to that poor asshole in Poverty Point? Like, do you not like? That's why they don't want to talk to you. Like, if you read between the lines of that interview, like they don't want that to be one of their employees. Because if that poor dude shows up to SEAC, like, God help him.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, basically, where people like Graham Hancock talk about the field of archaeology, the field of whatever, being against them, and they spend a career, decades upon decades, talking shit about people in that field to the point that, yes, all of a sudden archaeologists don't want to interact because we've seen decades of this guy talking about how terrible archaeologists are, right? So it's this weird, self-fulfilling prophecy that he and other people like him have ultimately created, right? So like, how do you get out of that death cycle, basically?
Yeah, and we had this talk when we were watching it. I personally think they fucked up by not letting him do it, especially someone as big as Graham Hancock. I understand why you wouldn't want to do it. And like, I refused that one show too, because of like what they were trying to get me to say. But like with somebody who like has a whole journalistic career of like, the archaeologists are out to get me and things like that. Like if you tell him, send him an email like that, of course he's going to read it on the show. And then it only makes him look better to the people that agree with him. But as Shane said, like, what else do we do? Just ignore him? And like, I really don't know what to do. They probably made the right call not having him there because he does vilify them, but I don't know. It only helps his case, in my opinion.
I mean, it comes down to this problem, right, of him making these shows, trying to interview people. Now all over social media, he's trying to debate archaeologists and anthropologists and other scientists, head to head. And I think it was John Hoops I just saw declined an interview with him and said something along the lines of, I can't debate metaphysics with you using science, and I refuse to do it using any other methods. So no, I'm going to politely decline your offer to be interviewed. Like you can't have these types of debates because people are operating on different planes, using different vernacular, using different quote unquote data sets. And you end up just talking around and past one another. And I think that's kind of missing some of the bigger points that I think we're probably talking about here.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. But he doesn't get into like crazy. Poverty Point sets up Serpent Mountain. So he doesn't talk about like an ancient apocalypse. He doesn't talk about a catastrophic event. He kind of uses it to set up like archaeologists don't buy in the archaeoastronomy. He even makes a quote that like archaeologists don't want any other science involved. Like they don't talk to astronomers. They don't talk to astrophysicists. Like that's how he uses Poverty Point in particular. Like, here's a site that has these astronomical events. It has these henges. Let me tell you how archaeologists aren't talking about these things because they are selfish, self-focused, and non-interdisciplinary, which anyone who's listened to this show, like we've had multiple, if not most of our guests are interdisciplinary scholars that work outside of just the confines of archaeology. Even the field of archaeology itself is built upon the use of other fields of studies, laws, methods, and practices. Like that's our field. We use geology. We, in particular, is a big one that which we take a lot of thought and theory from.
Some parts of archaeology start with geoarchaeology and some start with zooarchaeology. Like, I don't know.
Wasn't one of the biggest stories from last year was the people who were trying to date that Viking settlement in Newfoundland? They were using the combination of tree ring dating and solar flares or solar anomalies to pin down to like the exact year that it was settled. So I'm like, there's a good example. And that goes all the way back to like A.E. Douglas trying to find solar flares and dendro dates and stuff like that 100 years ago. Yeah, I don't know. When I see like this astronomical stuff and the astronomical alignments and everything, I still think it's just much more mundane, and that you've got hunter-gatherers on seasonal rounds just tracking seasons. It's like what Poverty Point is a big place where people came from all over. They brought stuff all over from Eastern North America. how do you know when the party is? Like, how do you know when everybody's showing? That's like, well, it's just a way to track seasonal time. And like people do this all the time.
Having not seen this and actually not really following much of this new show, is this only about North America?
This one episode.
Because what Shane just said also is a direct explanation of Stonehenge. When do hunter-gatherers know when the party is, right? And people came from all over what was at that time an island to join the Rager, right? Know that. How do you know where to go, right? That's the exact same thing that plays out time and time again in countless places around the world. It's not overly complex. We don't have to come up with these really wild ideas and theories to explain it. We see it playing out all over the world.
How do you feed all the people at the party? And it's like, probably because Poverty Point's at a major flyway for birds. That's a seasonal thing. When does Poverty Point go offline? It's like when it's major flooding. When does major flooding occur? That's a seasonal thing. Wouldn't know when, like knowing when seasons are about to turn over would be pretty damn important if you're hunter-gatherer. It doesn't have to be catastrophic apocalypse. Whatever the plural of apocalypse is.
Yeah, well, and then he really just, his end point of this is that we consider hunter-gatherers and people in the past as just like dumb hunter-gatherers. We don't attribute this sort of complexity to them, and that's kind of his jumping off point into serpent mounds. So at this point, we're going to end this segment, and we'll catch you in the third segment where we go into snake gators and serpent mounds.
Yeah, the alignments aren't right.
Welcome back to episode 136 of the Life Ignorance Podcast. We are here with Dr. Shane Miller and Dr. Jesse Toon talking about, was it Ancient Apocalypse? Graham Hancock's new show on Netflix, produced by his son. Must be nice. Anyway, I will say before we get cracking on this, the graphics are awesome on this thing. The animations, like if you could just animate a cool Clovis site that way, I would die. And then also, maybe not die, like the drone shots and the camera footage, the cinematography, like it's great. So if an archaeologist out there has the idea to write a really best-selling book and make a lot of money peddling your grift, go ahead and make a cool Netflix show out of it. That didn't make any sense. Probably it's kicking in.
No, it's like he's got Cosmos, like Neil deGrasse Tyson money.
Yeah, Cosmos money.
Yeah, like where he can like reconstruct. Yeah, it's like
there are some little interesting tricks if you know GIS, like what they're doing to get some of that stuff to pop. The Z scale is exaggerated, like on a lot of those. If you notice, like it's like X and Y are probably normal scale, but they probably have a multiplier on the Z to make the elevations more exaggerated and pop. That was something I was noticing on the Serpent Mound one, a little bit on the Poverty Point one, but really on the Serpent Mound one to make it seem like it jumps off the ground a little more and makes it pop a little more. Like, I'm not sure how realistic that actually is.
I guess it's for aesthetics, but it is.
I mean, I've done stuff like that too to try to like make that illustrate it like in conference papers and whatnot, but that's still cool. The graphics are great.
But he sets up Serpent Mounds like we talked about. Like he reads off the email from the authorities at Serpent Mounds. He talks about how archaeologists are censoring him because of it. He gets all upset. He's like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Archaeologists are ridiculing and insulting when you don't agree with their thoughts. And then he talks about, that's when he first throws in is like, I think this site is over 10,000 years old. And we were all like, where's the data? And it doesn't show up till later where he explains it.
It was well done.
Yeah. He does talk about how indigenous people were like sophisticated people that could have done this and like promotes indigenous ability to do that. But then kind of comes back at it to like shame archaeologists again. It's like archaeologists don't believe in indigenous people, but they're all gone. So, who knows what indigenous people said? It's like, wait the fuck a moment. It's like they exist still. And once again, did another quick Google search on like indigenous oral traditions of the Serpent Mounds and a shitload of articles popped up. So it's like, you didn't do your homework, dude. You're just trying to bring sympathy. He's using it as a mechanism to also hate archaeologists.
Yep.
Which is like valid 30 years ago. Now it's a little different. Yeah. So,
and his little companion this time is the neighbor of who owns the land next to Serpent Mounds and is like his expert that he kind of goes to and talks to, who is not an archaeologist.
He just owns the land next door. Like, that's it. And like David said, he looks like Lindsey Graham, and like,
And sounds like him.
yeah. And he's just kind of there. He's like, yeah, this is a spiritual place. Indians definitely build it. No one listens to it. Like, I think it's older. Like, he's not an authority in the field. And Graham Hancock just like pulled some dude just to reiterate it. It's like, time out. Who are you? And why do we care what you have to say? And ultimately, like, anyone with a brain should be like, time out. Who, like the poor park ranger at Poverty Point, man, like got the short end of the stick for sure in this.
In describing Serpent Mound, he really talks about, once again, these alignments of things. He says the different coils are pointing in celestial, astronomical kind of locations, and it's whatever. He kind of has like a whole part where he talks about that. Also, once again, nitpicking and being just whatever. His main point his main evidence that this thing is 10,000 years old specifically like focuses on the head and its location. I my brain can't physically form that argument.
But Jesse, you mentioned something in the interim about serpent mounds.
Yeah. So whenever anyone's looking at monumental architecture, whenever we're looking at these giant, earthen mounds created across the landscape, whether it's in North America or elsewhere, they're not a single event, right? If we look at what people of European descent did on Salisbury Plain and look at Stonehenge, it's clear that it's been rebuilt and refurbished time and time again. People do that to our houses today. We continually add on and reconstruct them. There's really good evidence to show that that's exactly what's happening at Serpent Mounds as well. There's a really fantastic paper by Edward Herman et al. Out of the Indiana University in Bloomington, where they're showing how Serpent Mound itself has been reconstructed over time, and that there are these quote unquote hidden coils of the snake, of the serpent, that are no longer visible on the surface of the ground, but geophysics shows that they're clearly present at different points in the past. So when we start down this conversation, down this path of, what these different things point to, they've been modified and changed throughout time, right? And so I think that's really important to kind of keep in mind, that these are not static things on the landscape, right? That culture and people are not static, and that they're constantly changing and being recreated, right?
I wonder if, because it didn't seem arbitrary, the lines he was drawing, like physically, from the mouth to the equinox, or like the bend of the serpent to like the summer solstice, the winter solstice, or whatever he was pointing to. But then he takes one, he's like, if you take the exact center of the coil of the tail and aim it this way, it aims to fucking Zeus's ball sack. I don't know what he was talking about. But if you did that with the other versions of the mounds that were like under there, like if they were probably in different parts, like what do those point to? He didn't mention that. So maybe he just didn't know.
Are we not going to collectively laugh at the Zeus's ball sack?
I
was trying to think of Orion's belt, but I couldn't get the words. It's not Orion's belt. It's Orion's penis is originally what it is. They just say belt.
Stop. Oh, my God.
So what Connor was alluding to is like the crux of Graham's over 10,000 year old argument is that he calls it the mouth of the snake. The snake doesn't have a mouth that has a elliptical head. He doesn't even use one of his animations to actually point where it goes to, which was also weird. He was really good at showing lines and angles, but for like his argument on the head, he doesn't actually bring one of those up, and he just says this doesn't align with the summer solstice. And he goes, and so it's like, okay, but he doesn't use an animation, doesn't show it, goes into how some science about how the earth rotates on its axis and how it tilts every now and then. The last time it would have been an alignment, is at the end of the last ice age during the Younger Dryas. And he doesn't really explain the math behind that. He just says then therefore it must be at least 10,000 years old, because if everything else is aligned, then this would have been aligned. But that brings up two questions. One, if that's true, then all the other alignments would have been out of place that he talked about in contemporary today. Those are based on the alignments today. So the Wiggles, the snake tails to Zeus's ball sack, those would have been out of alignment. So it kind of messes with it. But then again, as Jesse alluded to, it's been changed over time. So where did those point to it? Who knows? Has the head changed? We have to read Ed Herman's article on this to figure out where it could have been done. But it's a whole really weird argument that he constructs that's built on archaeologists are lying to us. We know that at Poverty Point. He mentions how the Woodhenge has a bunch of different radiocarbonates. Once again, to Jesse's point, that these sites have been refreshed over time with new wood poles and everything like that. That's why the radiocarbon dates are acting strangely. We know this. And he builds this really weird argument through the entire episode that's based on really thin strands of yarn, if we're talking about weaving a narrative here, on how this all points to his ancient apocalypse. And that's when he gets to, so if it's 10,000 years old, this is at the damn near border of the last glacial maximum. Then he goes into it's a snake. You know who else who believes in snakes? The Iroquois, who talk about the great horned serpent and it just
Well, then
bonkers.
He shows the wall from Game of Thrones saying that would be this is what it looked like at the last ice age, but he didn't remove the trees from the animation either. So it's just a weird juxtaposition, but it aligns with the Younger Dryas 10,000 years ago or whatever, or 12,000 years ago, because he's selling books about the Younger Dryas and how archaeologists are wrong about it. And it just I was like, oh my God. Anyway,
it was wild. He showed the J.J. Abrams wall, and then he showed the wall, and then he showed J.J. Abrams apocalypse happening, boom, and there's a pew and then a boom.
Yeah.
This is this. Yeah.
I was waiting for the Mastodon transformer.
That was the Black Power Ranger back in the day in Mighty Morphin. That was But it through this whole episode, especially when we got to that, it made me think of his book when we're talking about selling books. In America Before, he does this same shit, and specifically when talking about a lost civilization, which points to Atlantis, he compares the Pawnee Nation, specifically our star knowledge, to Egyptian star cults, and uses that as evidence for a long lost Atlantean civilization, that Pawnees and Egyptians came from the same place.
It's almost like you guys are looking at the same stars.
It's just it was wild. Yeah, I don't know, but
oh my God.
But the great horned serpent is a ubiquitous story in many American Indian traditions, especially east of the Mississippi, and also in the Great Plains. We have ours too. So it was a really weird, here's this evidence, here's this indigenous oral tradition from the Iroquois, who aren't necessarily ancestral to Ohio, that talk about a cataclysmic event that would have, it was this really weird, this is a serpent mound. Guess who has a tale about serpents? It was really, while he's wearing snake garters, the whole thing was just
in a lawn, a lawn mowed field.
Well, this was the part where he's on a log at night with his journal, with his post notes, and when he's showing the great horned serpent, on the next page next to it is a recreation of a Spiro gorget, which has the hand with the eye feature with two rattlesnakes wrapped around each other. It was just he never mentioned Spiro at any point. It was just this weird Google. He must have just Googled snake artifacts, because that's what will pop up, is that figure.
Well, Saruman identified that Aragorn was the true heir of Isildur because he had a ring with two snakes on it.
You got to be careful, man. Archeo Dunedain, if we're wrong, he'll come after us.
Oh my
That's
God.
True.
Oh yeah.
I mean, let's be honest here, right? I mean, this type of cherry picking of cosmologies and symbols, right? I mean, all of this, any 2 points are going to make a line, right? I mean, Voodoo religions coming out of ultimately West Africa, turns out a great serpent is really damn important to them too. And does he include that? Does he include serpent gods and any Eastern philosophies? No, it's just cherry picking random shit to make some compelling and interesting, I should say, book sales or Netflix show, right? I mean, Yeah. That's why ultimately, I mean, we as scientists, we as archaeologists, we as logical, rational thinking humans, it's a silly waste of our time to quote unquote debate these ideas and these people directly one-on-one, right? I mean, we're talking about two different things. So I don't know.
You know who else has a giant serpent imagery?
Oh no.
Glitch Mob, album cover Bandcamp.
Very good. Very good. Very good. So my question, like, here's just like a hypothetical that I want anybody like listening to this just to stop and think about, is like that like segment where he's talking about the head pointing at this particular direction, and the last time that it faced that direction was 12,800, which is the onset of the Younger Dryas. Ask yourself, who's checking his math?
Randall Carlson.
Any peer-reviewed article, like you've got somebody of like that's kind of, you got like at least 3 peer reviewers who are experts looking this over to make sure that you didn't just do dumb math and just, there's no data here. Like and I'm guaranteeing his books, there's no rigorous justification to back that up. It's just something that he just says. And it's just like, I wish people would have the same skepticism about him making those statements as he's inflicting upon the archaeological community with his own skepticism towards us. And it's like, how is he able to like point at our direction without getting the same shit going back at him from the people who are skeptical of everything, supposedly? Mm-hmm. It's a weird judo move.
It is weird, but then again, it's not. We see this playing out in other parts of our lives today, especially with political campaigns starting in 2016, right? Where you yell and scream about, the lack of professionalism and background training that, the quote unquote experts have. And so these outsiders, gain and garner all of this attention and become, these people talking about how the rest of, the professionals don't know what they're talking about, right? I mean, we see this in so many different realms of our lives these days, this idea of conspiracy theories where, the experts, the people don't know what they're talking about. So listen to the outsiders who are skeptical of that. We saw how that played out in American politics, right? And this is basically the same thing with this level of conspiracy theory. That's what this comes down to, right? It's conspiracy theories.
I think so. There's actually like a weird TikTok trend going on right now where the idea is that someone will run up to someone and like say, hit them and like tag, you're it, and then run away. And then as soon as they start chasing him, they're like, hey, stop, I don't want to play this game. Why are you attacking me? It's like they throw shade at us. And then as soon as we start throwing shade or data against them, back at them, they're like, oh, I don't want to play this game. You're just mainstream archaeologists. You're just trying to hide from me and be attacking me, etc. So we engage in this dialogue, but they don't want to play.
Well, it really seems like he wrote his first book. Archaeologists didn't take it so well, and he spent like the last 3 decades in a fucking tantrum and like using it as justification, like because he didn't do the proper scholastic research the first time around. He's like clearly had an interest in this and wanted to dip his toes in. He had some crazy theories, and the archaeological community was like, no, you didn't go through peer review. Here's the list of reasons why you're wrong. And he's made like 12 books since then, decrying archaeologists for being narrow-minded. And it's like, you're not like, the game sucks, but like there's rules for why we have peer reviewed, because you need experts to review and make sure you did things right. There are pros to cons to that, but like the biggest pro and what outweighs all of the, Revere 2 shitty comments, like, I see you built a car, have you thought about using a horse type of shit, is the fact that I'm glad I got someone to giggle. it's like it builds science. Like you have to make sure your ducks are in a row to put this kind of data to make it available. And part of what we're seeing, I think, as to Jesse's comment, is the lack of science communication that's occurred in archaeology for the past, mostly since it's the inception of its field. The paywalls that a lot of our scholastic research is behind, and the academic language that is just not nearly accessible to people outside of the discipline. And here's a guy who is a trained journalist who knows how to write to people, how to spin a compelling argument that's easily digestible, because our method of hypothesis testing and building arguments is different than how we've talked about before, how a lawyer builds their argument or how other people process of critical thinking plays. So it's like he's knows how to play the field, and we're in a different game that is kind of like more exclusive. And we're seeing, he's able to, however the hell his son became a Netflix producer, and I imagine that's how he got a Netflix show out of this. We're kind of seeing, really we're reaping what archaeologists have, unfortunately, like the bad crops of not being good science communicators. But that kind of leads to this other thing that Jesse has mentioned. It's like, what does this say to a nation that digests what Netflix is pitching, where there is this entertainment rather than science that a lot of people are watching? Because this show has been rated recently. It's been out for like almost a month, and it's been in the top 10. I think right now it sits both in the US and the UK as the number 2 show right now that's being watched by people. And I've had, and I'm sure you guys have too, like I've had numerous people who I haven't talked to in years have reached out to me asking, like, what are your thoughts on Graham Hancock?
So, Carlton, that makes me think of a couple of things. And I don't want to talk to you four right now. I want to talk to everyone else that's listening, specifically to a couple of groups, right? To fellow professional archaeologists and to specifically non-archaeologists, right? Anyone that's listening. If you want to talk to an archaeologist, we want to talk to you. Call us. Shoot us an email. Carlton mentioned paywalls, and I could rant for a long time about science of any field being hidden behind paywalls. If you want to read something that a professional archaeologist wrote in a journal, just look at their name and Google us. We're not hard to find. Google us and shoot us an email, and we will more than happily send you the thing you want to read and 10 other things that you didn't even know existed, and we'll tell you about it over the phone or in the email. A lot, right? Please reach out to us. Also, professional archaeologists, I challenge all of us. Every time you write something, we write something for an academic audience, whether it is a book chapter, a peer-reviewed journal article, write a companion piece that's tailored to a public audience, that is less jargony, and try to publish that somewhere that reaches an audience that's not professional archaeologists. We need to do a better job of communicating this information, right? Like Carlton said, a lot of this is on us, right? I challenge all of us to do that. Every time we publish something in an academic setting, write a companion piece for a non-academic audience. And let's see what happens.
If you can't fit your dissertation topic into a 1,200 character Instagram post, you shouldn't be writing it. That's what I say to most students. It needs to be easy to digest.
Sapiens blogs are 1,000 words, and those are
quick and easy,
and not behind a paywall.
If you want to contact me and talk to me about archaeology, you can contact Derek Anderson at bta@msstate.edu.
We gotta get him on too.
I think all our legal counsel, if you have any legal questions, go to Derek Anderson as well. So just all the communication, let's go to him.
I know we're running low on time, but Jesse brought up a good point earlier about Netflix has a habit of pushing entertainment over facts and science. I won't iterate it again, but I did film that pilot with that company, and it was just okay, I see what you guys are doing. I didn't like it. And then I watched Dahmer recently, the new Dahmer biopic, and it was compelling. I really enjoyed it. It was good entertainment, but I looked up, what's true about this, what's not. And apparently they really played up the racism aspect, which was done up because of the times. A lot of it was faked. A lot of things in there didn't actually happen. And of course, they made Dahmer look to be like a tragic hero kind of thing, or like a Tony Soprano, which is obviously problematic. But I looked that up, and my cousin was like, why do you ruin these documentaries for yourself? And I was like, because whenever I watch an archaeology documentary, there's always 70% bullshit in it. So like, what other documentary, science-wise or like murder mystery-wise, am I getting fed bullshit or fact? And like, I think it's a great point, Jesse. Like, Netflix isn't going to put out good content, unfortunately. So it's like, I don't know one show on there that's like great.
They are putting out fantastic content. I love Netflix, but not for science.
I'm a slut for the crown.
They're putting out
Oh my God.
It must be the fratness. I mean, like, I just love the fucking the royal drama that's in the crowd. I'm like, oh yes, give it to me. I know this.
I have no words.
I don't either. Vox Explained is a great show on Netflix. Really good science, really good like political stuff, really good other stuff, but it's run by a very, very like, I would say left-leaning news company. So you're getting like a kind of bias when you learn what they're doing. So it's like, how much am I getting spoon-fed things, you know? And like, they're not going to put too much right-leaning stuff on there, I guess, but that's for Ben Shapiro's network. But
I wish they'd do a show like the Zac Efron show where he's like running around doing like the alternative, like, you know, like the climate conscious kind of food and environmental stuff that like, I wish they'd do something like that for archaeology. We need like a Zac Efron for archaeology, just to like cruise around and not like Time Team America. Like I'm talking like just, it's like engaging good content that's fun. It's like watching Zac Efron go to a geothermal facility on Iceland and like have people explain how that works. And like, and it's aesthetically beautiful and it's entertaining. And instead archaeology gets Grahamcock.
And on that note,
y'all have been Grahamcock today.
We've all been Grahamcocked.
The camera's right there.
Yes. And on that note, we're going to drum up with a bunch of links and sources. We'll put those in the episode description down below, as well as Shane and Jesse's contact information. If you've listened to the show for a while, you know these two. So we'll have their emails down below and their associated social media that they allow to be available to all you goons that ravenously follow us. Caleb Welch is already set. We know that. Follows us already. And I guess, same old stuff. If you're following on the listening to us on the All Showed Seed, please stop, subscribe to our show. You've heard me rant about this. You need to subscribe to our show for us to get sponsors and advertisers to help grow our brand.
Please remember to rate and review the podcast. Rating really helps. Reviewing the podcast or giving us a review really helps. And I also would like to say, I don't think the 5 of us, wait, I can get 1, 2, 3, 5 of us, wouldn't shame you for watching the show. Like, go ahead and watch Hancock's show. Like, it's great. Rate and review that show, but also rate and review ours. Like, I just want you to be skeptical when you watch it, and you should be skeptical when you listen to ours too, because we have our own opinions.
Yeah, go dislike that show. Yeah, go follow it, watch it, dislike it. That's been the call to action I've seen online, is like, just dislike the show. Tell Netflix this is not okay.
I didn't think about that.
Shane and Jesse, we've asked you this question a number of times. Connor, take it away.
We're not going to ask you. They're ruins, people. We know it. I think we're out.
Fair enough. We're out. Thanks for listening to A Life in Ruins podcast.
You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Life in Ruins Podcast, and you can also email us at alifeinruinspodcast@gmail.com.
And remember, make sure to bring your archaeologists in from the cold and feed them beer.
And if you made it to the end of this show, you know it's our favorite time. We haven't had a Connor joke in several episodes. No, we had the one. No, you did do the one with
Josh.
That was a good joke.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That was a good one. All right, what do you got for us today, Connor?
All right, this one's bad. Why don't boxers have sex the night before a fight? Because they don't really like each other.
All right. That was
good. He's avoiding eye contact with all of us right now.
Oh god, that was good.
I wasn't expecting that.
Oh Jesus! Okay, we're done. We're done.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.